Tunnel rats were soldiers who participated in underground search and destroy missions during the Vietnam War. They were volunteers who entered elaborate tunnel systems, often alone, to fight the enemy, gather intelligence, and destroy tunnels. Their early survival rate was less than 5%.
I guess it's about time I tell someone what I found down in those tunnels. Maybe it'll help me sleep, or maybe it'll bring back everything I've tried to bury. Either way, I'm an old man now, retired Marine. There's no one left to hunt me down for telling the truth. They called us tunnel rats. You've probably heard of us, the crazy ones who crawled into those tiny, stinking, pitch-black tunnels during the Vietnam War, hunting for booby traps, caches of supplies, or, more often than not, Viet Cong. It wasn't the job anyone wanted, but you didn't have a choice. You got orders, and you went in. This was near the end of my tour, early 1970s, in the Ho Chi tunnels, just outside Ho Chi Minh City. It was supposed to be a routine job, like all the others, but I'd heard rumors, whispers really, that the tunnels had started to change. Troops who'd gone down recently said they felt watched. I brushed it off as just nerves, but after that last descent, I knew they weren't lying. We crawled in like usual, a tight space, barely enough to turn around if you needed to, just dirt walls closing in around you. Every sound was magnified, the scuffling of rats, the faint echoes of movement far ahead or behind. The claustrophobia gets to you, but we were trained to handle it, or so we thought. We'd been going for what felt like hours, deeper than I'd ever gone before, when we found it. A cavern, so big it felt wrong to be underground. It was like the earth had split open and formed this place, just to keep secrets. But what I saw, I'll never unsee it. The cavern was covered in blood, splatters so fresh they glistened, and body parts scattered everywhere, limbs, intestines, torsos, all torn apart, like a massacre had just happened. But there was no sign of a fight, no bullet holes or craters from explosions, just a raw, frenzied brutality. It looked like they'd been eaten. The stench was unbearable, not just the smell of death. I'd smelled that before. This was fouler, rotten, yes, but also something else. Something unnatural. Then we heard it, a sound like claws dragging across stone. First from one side, then from another. It echoed around us, coming from everywhere at once. Someone muttered a prayer under his breath. Then that smell hit us, even stronger. My stomach turned, and I felt my skin prickle. Before we could process it, they emerged. Dozens, no, hundreds, of things started shuffling into the cavern. They had empty eyes, glowing red, and skin that was gray and stretched taut over bones. Some were missing jaws, others limbs, like they'd been torn apart and somehow put back together. One of the guys fired. It did nothing. A bullet through the head or chest. They just kept coming, moaning in a way that sounded like they were all speaking, a low chant, saying something over and over. We panicked, started shooting, but it was like fighting smoke. They just kept coming. I'll never forget the moment when I locked eyes with one of them. It was the face of a soldier, probably one of ours, half decayed, a look of endless hunger staring back. Then he lunged. Everything after that was a blur. We ran, scrambled, crawling and clawing to get out. I could hear my friends screaming behind me, but I didn't look back. Somehow I made it to the exit, feeling that foul air at my back, the echo of red eyes, and that never-ending chant following me. Only 2 of us made it out of that descent, and neither of us spoke about it again. They said we'd lost the others to a firefight, but we knew the truth. I don't know what I saw down there, but I'm convinced of one thing. We tunneled into something we weren't meant to find.
Thank you, Sergeant, for your cooperation with our investigation this far. Would you mind telling the committee about your team's equipment, and if you feel you were given adequate resources for the mission?
All right, I'll go deeper. Maybe these details will paint a clearer picture. I'll try to remember everything, every piece of gear, every round of ammo we carried down there, anything that might show you just how unprepared we were for what we found. Back then, I was carrying the basics for a tunnel rat. We weren't overloaded with gear. Anything that could slow us down or make noise was left behind. My sidearm was a Colt M1011, a .45 caliber pistol. Its punch was good, reliable, but we only carried about 2 magazines down there, 14 rounds if we were lucky. We weren't supposed to get into firefights. If you needed more than a few rounds, it was already too late. Our main light source was a small flashlight, just a few inches long, taped red to dim the beam. A bright light would give us away instantly, so we kept it low. You'd be surprised at how dark it gets down there. You start seeing shadows move that aren't really there, hearing things that might not exist. But that day, those shadows and sounds were all too real. We didn't carry rifles or long guns underground. They were too bulky for those tight spaces. I had a Ka bar knife strapped to my belt for close quarters, which turned out to be useless against what we faced that day. Our uniforms were basic jungle fatigues, olive drab, long-sleeved, even in the heat, to protect from scrapes and bites from the rats. We wore a light load-bearing harness, and a few guys had flak jackets, though I didn't wear mine that day. It was hot and heavy, and I figured I'd be faster without it. I was also carrying a few grenades, just the standard M26s. Grenades weren't really meant for tunnels. If one went off in a small space, it was just as likely to kill us as the enemy. Still, I'd brought 2, more out of habit than anything else. It turned out to be the only thing that saved my life. On that final descent, I was with 5 others, standard team, 3 tunnel rats, 2 support guys. We started in with the usual, ducking low, feeling our way along the walls. I can still feel the dirt clinging to my hands, the way the tunnel seemed to squeeze tighter the farther we went. Sometimes we'd hear movement ahead, soft rustling, a rat skittering away, or the faint shuffle of our own feet echoing in the dark. The deeper we went, the more wrong it felt. I can't explain it any better than that. It was like a dampness hung in the air, along with a smell that I can only describe as ancient, like moldy soil and rotting flesh. That smell grew stronger with every step. Then we hit that cavern. I'd never seen anything like it before, a space so vast underground that our lights barely reached the other side. I remember the flashlights sweeping across the blood-stained ground, finding severed limbs and torsos, pieces of soldiers, maybe civilians. Their bodies had been mauled, chewed apart, blood pooled in the dirt, thick and fresh, but no shell casings, no craters, no bodies wearing any kind of military uniform, just remnants of something, eaten alive. The first sound we heard was like claws scraping against rock. We couldn't tell where it was coming from. It echoed in a way that made the cavern feel alive, like it was breathing, shifting around us. Then came the smell, like something long dead had been uncovered. It was a foulness that seemed to stick to our skin, turning our stomachs even as we clenched our teeth. Then they came, hundreds of them. Some were fresh, with faces you could still recognize, tattered fatigues, even bits of dog tags, eyes glowing red in the dark. Some had half-rotten bodies, bloated and bruised, and others looked skeletal, just bones and ragged skin. They shambled in, their faces twisted with an expression that was both blank and hungry. Their mouths opened and closed, as if they were speaking, but all that came out was a low, guttural moan that seemed to vibrate the very ground we stood on. The first guy to fire was Hawkins. He'd drawn his M1911 and unloaded half his magazine into one of them. A guy in shredded black pajamas with what looked like half a human arm still clutched in his grip. Every shot hit, but nothing happened. No blood, no flinching, just those red eyes staring back, as if to say, "You can't hurt me." The rest of us panicked. We opened fire, bullets ricocheting off the cavern walls, some hitting their marks but doing nothing. The creatures kept closing in, unfazed. I grabbed one of my grenades, pulled the pin, and lobbed it toward the center of the horde. It went off with a deafening roar, and the cavern filled with dust and smoke. For a split second, I thought we might have a chance, but when the dust cleared, they were still there, closing in, slower but steady, their empty, hungry faces fixed on us. We scrambled to retreat. Johnson went down first. One of them lunged, wrapping skeletal arms around his neck and pulling him into the swarm. He didn't even have a chance to scream. The rest of us were crawling and stumbling, trying to find the tunnel entrance we came in through. I fired my last rounds over my shoulder, but they were practically useless. Their faces were burned into my mind. Those red, glowing eyes, that endless hunger. It felt like hours, but somehow I clawed my way out of that cursed place. When I finally stumbled out into daylight, I collapsed, gasping for air, feeling that foul stench still clinging to me. Out of the 6 men who'd gone in, only 2 of us crawled out. We never told anyone what we saw, not fully. Command wrote it off as a lost unit, a botched operation, but I knew better. That wasn't the Viet Cong we found down there. Whatever it was, whatever we'd unleashed, I think it came from somewhere far deeper.
Thank you, Sergeant. The nation remains indebted to you for your heroic service. Now, if you'll excuse me, guard, take him away, and throw away the key when you're done. This can never be heard outside of these walls. Do I make myself clear, Private?